3 armed men thought they had grabbed the perfect victim, a quiet florist from downtown Millhaven who wouldn't fight back. They had no idea that Cassidy Reynolds was a decorated Navy SEAL with 12 years of Black Ops experience. Until she broke the first kidnapper's wrist with her zip-tied hands and turned their ransom demand into their worst nightmare. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Meet Cassidy, Cass Reynolds, 34 years old, shoulder-length auburn hair usually pulled back in a simple ponytail, standing 5 feet 6 inches with a lean but unremarkable build. To everyone in the quiet coastal town of Millhaven, Oregon, she was simply the woman who ran Petals Stems, the charming flower shop on Riverside Avenue. She'd owned the business for 3 years now, ever since moving to town from somewhere back east. As the locals described it, Cass had the kind of gentle demeanor that made customers feel instantly comfortable. She spoke softly, moved with unhurried grace, and had an almost meditative way of arranging flowers that drew people to watch her work through the shop's large front windows. Elderly women would bring their grandchildren to see the flower lady create beautiful bouquets. And young couples planning weddings would spend hours discussing their dream arrangements with her patient guidance. Every morning at 7 a.m. sharp, Cass would unlock the sage green door of her shop, flip the hand-painted open sign, and begin her daily routine. She'd check the refrigerated displays, trim fresh stems, and arrange the day's featured flowers in the window display. The shop was small but meticulously organized. Every tool had its place. Every surface was spotless. And the soft classical music that played throughout the day created an atmosphere of calm sophistication. Millhaven itself was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business, or thought they did. With a population of just 8,400 people nestled between the Cascade Mountains and the Pacific Coast, it was a town where the most exciting news was usually about who was dating whom, or which local restaurant had changed their menu. The pace of life moved slowly, deliberately, like the fog that rolled in from the ocean. Most evenings Cass fit into this peaceful rhythm perfectly. She'd chat with Mrs. Pemberton about her prize-winning roses, help teenage boys pick out "I'm sorry" bouquets for their girlfriends, and create elaborate centerpieces for the monthly Rotary Club dinners. She volunteered at the annual Harvest Festival, donated flowers for funeral services, and always had fresh coffee brewing for customers who wanted to linger and talk to the residents of Millhaven. Cass Reynolds was exactly what she appeared to be, a gentle, artistic woman who had chosen a quiet life surrounded by beautiful flowers. She drove a modest silver Honda Civic, lived in a small cottage on Maple Street with a garden that was the envy of the neighborhood, and seemed to have no family or close relationships outside of her friendly customer interactions. "She's a lovely girl, but so shy," Mrs. Henderson from the bakery next door would tell people. "Never talks about herself, never seems to date anyone. I think she might have had her heart broken before she came here. She has that look, like someone who's been through something difficult." The assumption was that Cass had probably left behind a failed relationship or a stressful job in some big city, seeking peace and simplicity in small-town life. People respected her privacy and gentle nature. She was seen as someone who needed protecting, not someone who could protect others. Local mechanic Jake Patterson had asked her out twice, both times receiving polite but firm declinations. "She's got walls up," he'd tell his buddies at Murphy's Tavern. "Sweet as can be, but you can tell she's got some kind of past she doesn't want to talk about. Probably better off leaving her alone." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Even Police Chief Robert Kellerman, a 20-year veteran who prided himself on reading people, saw Cass as a model citizen who would probably faint at the sight of real trouble. "Nice lady," he'd say when her name came up. "Keeps to herself, runs a clean business, never had so much as a parking ticket. The kind of person who makes this job easy." Cass had cultivated this perception carefully over 3 years. She attended the monthly town council meetings, sitting quietly in the back and occasionally asking thoughtful questions about local environmental issues. She shopped at Brennan's Market every Tuesday and Friday, always polite to the cashiers. Always paying with exact change from a small leather wallet. Her cottage on Maple Street was as unremarkable as she was, painted soft yellow with white trim. A small front porch with hanging baskets of petunias, and a backyard garden where she grew many of the flowers she used in her arrangements. Neighbors would sometimes see her in the early morning hours, tending to her plants with the same careful attention she gave everything else. She had a routine that never varied. Shop open at 7 a.m. Lunch break at noon, usually a sandwich eaten in the back room while reading. Close at 6 p.m., home by 6:30. Weekends were spent hiking the coastal trails alone, working in her garden, or reading novels on her front porch swing. She seemed to have found perfect contentment in this simple, predictable life. What none of them knew was that this peaceful existence was exactly what Cassidy Reynolds needed after 12 years of missions that couldn't be discussed. 3 armed men thought they had grabbed the perfect victim, a quiet florist from downtown Millhaven who wouldn't fight back. They had no idea that Cassidy Reynolds was a decorated Navy SEAL with 12 years of Black Ops experience, until she broke the first kidnapper's wrist with her zip-tied hands and turned their ransom demand into their worst nightmare. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Meet Cass Reynolds, 34 years old, shoulder-length auburn hair usually pulled back in a simple ponytail, standing 5 feet 6 inches with a lean but unremarkable build. To everyone in the quiet coastal town of Millhaven, Oregon, she was simply the woman who ran Petals Stems, the charming flower shop on Riverside Avenue. She'd owned the business for 3 years now, ever since moving to town from somewhere back east. As the locals described it, Cass had the kind of gentle demeanor that made customers feel instantly comfortable. She spoke softly, moved with unhurried grace, and had an almost meditative way of arranging flowers that drew people to watch her work through the shop's large front windows. Elderly women would bring their grandchildren to see the flower lady create beautiful bouquets, and young couples planning weddings would spend hours discussing their dream arrangements with her patient guidance. Every morning at 7 a.m. sharp, Cass would unlock the sage green door of her shop, flip the hand-painted open sign, and begin her daily routine. She'd check the refrigerated displays, trim fresh stems, and arrange the day's featured flowers in the window display. The shop was small but meticulously organized. Every tool had its place. Every surface was spotless. And the soft classical music that played throughout the day created an atmosphere of calm sophistication. Millhaven itself was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business, or thought they did. With a population of just 8,400 people nestled between the Cascade Mountains and the Pacific Coast, it was a town where the most exciting news was usually about who was dating whom, or which local restaurant had changed their menu. The pace of life moved slowly, deliberately, like the fog that rolled in from the ocean. Most evenings Cass fit into this peaceful rhythm perfectly. She'd chat with Mrs. Pemberton about her prize-winning roses, help teenage boys pick out "I'm sorry" bouquets for their girlfriends, and create elaborate centerpieces for the monthly Rotary Club dinners. She volunteered at the annual Harvest Festival, donated flowers for funeral services, and always had fresh coffee brewing for customers who wanted to linger and talk to the residents of Millhaven. Cass Reynolds was exactly what she appeared to be, a gentle, artistic woman who had chosen a quiet life surrounded by beautiful flowers. She drove a modest silver Honda Civic, lived in a small cottage on Maple Street with a garden that was the envy of the neighborhood, and seemed to have no family or close relationships outside of her friendly customer interactions. She's a lovely girl, but so shy. Mrs. Henderson from the bakery next door would tell people. Never talks about herself, never seems to date any. Frank Brennan, the store's owner, had instructed all his employees to give Cass special attention. "That girl's been through something tough, you can see it in her eyes," he'd say during staff meetings. "We look out for our own here, and she's clearly someone who's had enough hardship. Make sure she knows she's safe in Millhaven." Police Chief Kellerman had made it a point to drive past her shop twice during every shift, convinced that Cass was the kind of citizen who would become a victim if he didn't keep an eye on things. "Predators can sense vulnerability," he'd tell his officers. And that florist girl practically broadcasts it. Sweet as pie, but about as tough as tissue paper. If any trouble comes to this town, she'd be the first target. Deputy Sarah Martinez, one of only 2 female officers in Millhaven, had tried several times to befriend Cass and offer unofficial self-defense lessons. "I keep telling her she should at least carry pepper spray," Martinez would complain to her partner. But she just smiles and changes the subject. "I don't think she has an aggressive bone in her body. It's actually kind of concerning." Even Father McKenna at St. Andrew's Catholic Church, where Cass donated flowers every Sunday, saw her as a lost lamb needing spiritual protection. "That poor child carries sadness like a heavy coat," he'd tell his parishioners. "Whatever drove her to our little town, she's seeking peace and healing. We must be her shelter from whatever storm she's weathered." The women of Millhaven had developed elaborate theories about Cass's background, all centering around the idea that she was a victim of circumstances beyond her control. At the weekly bridge club meeting held in Martha Whitfield's living room, the speculation would run wild. "I think she was married to an abusive man," declared Ruth Simpson, the town librarian. "She has that careful way of moving, like she's afraid of making someone angry. Thank goodness she escaped and found us." Betty Crawford, who ran the local bed and breakfast, had a different theory. No, I think she lost a child. You can see it in how gentle she is with the Peterson children when they visit the shop. There's a sadness there that only comes from that kind of loss." Even the teenagers at Millhaven High School had noticed Cass during their walks past the flower shop. "She's like a Disney princess," 16-year-old Amy Foster would tell her friends. "All soft and kind and probably talks to animals. I bet she's never even seen a real fight, let alone been in one." The local business community had similarly gentle assessments of their newest member. During monthly Chamber of Commerce meetings at the Millhaven Community Center, Cass was often discussed in protective, almost parental terms. Hardware store owner Bill Davidson would shake his head whenever her name came up. "Sweet girl, but not practical at all. I've tried to sell her a proper security system for that shop, but she says the door lock is fine. Doesn't understand that criminals look for easy targets. She's got no street sense whatsoever." Dr. Patricia Hoffman, who ran the town's only medical clinic, had prescribed mild anxiety medication for Cass after what she described as panic attacks during a routine physical exam. "She's extremely sensitive," Dr. Hoffman would tell her nurse. "Jumps at sudden sounds, gets nervous around medical equipment. Classic signs of someone who's lived through trauma, but lacks any coping mechanisms. She needs a calm, stress-free environment." Back in their dingy motel room on the outskirts of town, the 3 criminals would review their surveillance notes with growing confidence. They had watched Cass's routines for weeks, noting how she always walked with her head down, avoided eye contact with strangers, and seemed to shrink away from any form of confrontation. "She's scared of her own shadow," Vinny would laugh, spreading photos across the cigarette-burned table. "Look at this. Tuesday morning, some guy honked his horn in traffic and she practically jumped out of her skin. Wednesday afternoon, a dog barked and she dropped her coffee cup. This chick's gonna fold the second we walk through that door. Derek had been particularly impressed by what he saw as Cass's complete lack of awareness. She never checks her surroundings, never varies her routine, never even locks her car. It's like she's living in some fairy tale where nothing bad ever happens. She's gonna be so shocked when we grab her. She probably won't even scream. Tank's analysis was typically blunt. She's weak. You can smell weakness on people like her from a mile away. Bet she's never thrown a punch in her life. Probably apologizes when other people bump into her. This is gonna be the easiest job we ever pulled. By the time the three men were ready to make their move, they had convinced themselves, with the unwitting help of an entire town, that Cassidy Reynolds was exactly what she appeared to be, a fragile, traumatized woman who had chosen a quiet life because she couldn't handle anything more challenging. They had no idea that every nervous glance was actually a tactical assessment of her environment. They didn't recognize that her submissive posture was the relaxed stance of someone confident enough in her abilities to appear non-threatening. They couldn't see that her fearful reactions to sudden sounds were the automatic responses of someone whose survival had once depended on split-second threat evaluation. Entire town of Millhaven had looked at Cassidy Reynolds and seen exactly what she wanted them to see. A gentle soul who needed protection, not someone capable of providing it. They saw weakness where there was strength, vulnerability where there was controlled power, and helplessness where there was carefully concealed lethality. It was a masterful performance that had fooled everyone for 3 years. But it was about to be tested in ways that would shatter every assumption the people of Millhaven and 3 very confident criminals had ever made about the quiet florist who arranged roses and minded her own business. The stage was set for a revelation that would prove just how dangerous it could be to mistake a sheep's clothing for the wolf beneath. The first hint that Cassidy Reynolds might be more than she appeared came on a rainy Thursday afternoon in October. Though no one at the time understood what they were witnessing. Mrs. Eleanor Blackstone, the elderly woman who lived above the antique shop next door, had been struggling with a heavy delivery of vintage furniture. The deliverymen had left 3 large wooden crates on the sidewalk, claiming they couldn't carry them up the narrow stairs to her second-floor apartment. Eleanor stood in the drizzle, wringing her hands as she watched her precious antiques getting soaked. Cass emerged from her flower shop, took one look at the situation, and immediately assessed the problem with an efficiency that seemed almost military in its precision. Without saying a word, she examined each crate, calculating weight distribution and the safest carrying angles. Then, in one fluid motion, she hoisted the heaviest crate, a solid oak dresser that had taken 2 men to carry off the truck, and carried it up the stairs as if it weighed nothing more than a basket of daisies. Good heavens! Dear, Eleanor gasped, watching Cass return for the second crate. That must weigh at least 200 pounds. How on earth did you? Cass paused, realizing she had moved too efficiently, too easily. Oh, I used to help my uncle with his moving business, she said quickly, offering a shy smile. You learned proper lifting techniques. But Eleanor had been around long enough to recognize the difference between proper technique and exceptional physical conditioning. The way Cass had handled that furniture wasn't just about knowing how to lift. It was about having the core strength and controlled power that took years to develop. Still, Eleanor simply thanked her and mentioned nothing more about it, though she found herself watching the flower shop with new curiosity. A month later, during the annual Harvest Festival, another moment caught people's attention. The festival's main attraction was always the dunking booth, operated by the Millhaven Fire Department as a fundraiser. This year, they had added a new twist, a speed competition to see who could hit the target and dunk Fire Chief Anderson the fastest. Local men lined up to try their luck, including Jake Patterson from the garage and several off-duty police officers. The target was small, positioned about 30 feet away, and the game required precision rather than strength. One by one, contestants missed their mark or took multiple throws to succeed. When little Timothy Henderson lost his dollar and started crying because he couldn't hit the target, Cass quietly stepped forward. "May I try?" she asked softly, placing a dollar in the collection jar. Chief Anderson chuckled from his perch above the water tank. "Sure thing, Miss Reynolds. But don't feel bad if you can't hit it. Most folks take a few tries." Cass picked up the baseball, feeling its weight and balance in her palm. For just a moment, her demeanor shifted imperceptibly. Her stance became more grounded. Her grip adjusted with the precision of someone who understood projectile physics at an instinctual level. She drew her arm back and released the ball in one smooth, controlled motion. The baseball struck the target dead center with such force that the mechanism triggered instantly, sending Chief Anderson plunging into the tank with a tremendous splash. The crowd erupted in cheers, but what impressed the observant few wasn't just that she had hit the target. It was the casual confidence with which she had done it, as if the outcome had never been in doubt. "Beginner's luck," Cass said with a modest shrug, but Deputy Martinez, who had been watching from the sidelines, noticed something others missed. The throw hadn't just been accurate, it had been professionally executed, with the kind of form and follow-through that spoke of extensive training. "Where did you learn to throw like that?" Martinez asked casually as they walked away from the booth. "High school softball," Cass replied quickly. "I wasn't very good at much else, but I had a decent arm." Yet Martinez couldn't shake the feeling that what she had witnessed was far more sophisticated than high school athletics. The way Cass had assessed the target, calculated the trajectory, and delivered the throw with such controlled power suggested training that went well beyond weekend recreation. Winter brought, perhaps the most telling incident, though once again, its significance was largely overlooked by those who witnessed it. A group of college students from Portland had come to Millhaven for a weekend skiing trip in the nearby mountains. They were loud, boisterous, and after several hours at Murphy's Tavern, increasingly aggressive toward the locals. Around 10 o'clock on a Saturday night, Cass was walking home from the shop where she had been working late on wedding arrangements for the upcoming weekend. The students were gathered outside the tavern, their voices carrying across the quiet street as they made crude comments about the hick town and its residents. As Cass approached, trying to pass by unnoticed, one of the students, a large young man wearing a university hockey jersey, stepped directly into her path. "Hey there, flower girl," he slurred, his breath reeking of alcohol. "Why don't you come party with some real men instead of these small-town losers?" Cass stopped, her posture remaining relaxed and non-threatening. "I'm just trying to get home," she said quietly. "Please let me pass." The student laughed and grabbed her arm roughly. "Come on, don't be stuck up. We're offering you some excitement for once in your boring little life." What happened next lasted only seconds, but those who saw it would remember every detail. Cass's response was so quick and controlled that most observers couldn't quite process what they had witnessed. The student found himself face down on the pavement, his arm twisted behind his back in what appeared to be some kind of restraint hold, while Cass maintained her grip with one hand and kept her other hand free for additional threats. "I asked you politely to let me pass," she said calmly, her voice never rising above conversational level. "I won't ask again." The other students, suddenly sobered by the sight of their friend completely immobilized by the quiet florist, backed away with raised hands. Cass released her hold and the young man scrambled to his feet, clutching his shoulder and staring at her with a mixture of pain and bewilderment. "What the hell are you?" he gasped. Cass simply picked up her purse from where it had fallen and continued walking toward her cottage. "Just someone who wants to get home safely," she replied without looking back. The incident was over so quickly that those who witnessed it, from inside the tavern, weren't entirely sure what had happened. The prevailing theory was that the drunk student had simply tripped and fallen while harassing the poor florist. Even the students themselves seemed uncertain about exactly how their friend had ended up on the ground. But Jake Patterson, who had stepped outside just as the confrontation was ending, had seen enough to know that what he witnessed wasn't luck or accident. The way Cass had moved, the precision of her defensive response, and most importantly, the complete calm she had maintained throughout the encounter suggested training that went far beyond basic self-defense classes. "Did you see that?" he asked Deputy Martinez the next morning. "See what?" Martinez replied, though she had heard rumors about some kind of incident outside Murphy's. "That flower shop lady, Cass, she put some college kid on the ground last night. I mean, really put him down. It was like watching a cop handle a suspect, you know. Real professional-like." Martinez made a mental note to ask around about the incident, but when she questioned the college students before they left town, their stories were vague and contradictory. The young man who had been restrained claimed he had simply slipped on the wet pavement, though he kept rubbing his shoulder and seemed reluctant to discuss the details. Over the following weeks, these small incidents began to form a pattern for those paying attention. There was the time Cass had noticed a gas leak at the hardware store before anyone else smelled it, identifying the source and potential danger with an expertise that surprised the fire department. There was her uncanny ability to predict weather changes hours before they appeared on any forecast. As if she had been trained to read environmental signs that others missed. Most telling was an incident during the power outage caused by a winter storm. While the rest of Millhaven fumbled around in the darkness, Cass moved through her shop and the surrounding area with a confidence that suggested she was completely comfortable operating in low-light conditions. She helped elderly neighbors navigate their homes, assisted the volunteer fire department in checking on isolated residents, and seemed to possess an almost supernatural ability to function effectively when others were disoriented and confused. "It's like she's done this before," Chief Kellerman mentioned to his wife after the storm passed. "Most people panic when the lights go out, but she was completely calm. Almost like she had training for emergency situations. Yet each time someone began to question Cass's background or abilities, she would deflect their curiosity with self-deprecating explanations and modest smiles. She was just lucky, just observant, just someone who had learned a few useful skills from various life experiences. Nothing special, nothing that warranted closer examination. The people of Millhaven wanted to believe these explanations because they fit the narrative they had constructed about their gentle florist. It was easier to accept that she was simply a quick learner or naturally observant than to consider that she might be something entirely different from what she appeared to be. But seeds of doubt had been planted. A few observant residents began to notice inconsistencies between Cass's claimed background and her demonstrated capabilities. The question was whether anyone would piece together these scattered clues before it was too late, before 3 criminals discovered just how badly they had misjudged their intended victim. The small incidents that had puzzled a few observant residents quickly became twisted into new reasons to view Cassidy Reynolds as someone desperately in need of protection, rather than recognizing her capabilities. The community of Millhaven interpreted each display of competence as evidence of her fragility and the traumatic past they believed she was hiding. Dr. Patricia Hoffman was the first to formalize these concerns into what she considered professional medical opinion. After hearing about the confrontation outside Murphy's Tavern through the town's gossip network, she called Cass in for what she described as a wellness check. The appointment was scheduled under the pretense of a routine follow-up, but Dr. Hoffman had already diagnosed what she believed was happening. "Cassidy, I've been hearing some concerning reports about incidents involving you," Dr. Hoffman said gently, adjusting her reading glasses as she reviewed a file that seemed to grow thicker each time Cass visited. "The episode with those college students particularly worries me. Sometimes when people have experienced severe trauma, they can develop what we call hypervigilance, an exaggerated startle response that can manifest as seeming aggressive or defensive behaviors. Cass sat quietly in the examination chair, recognizing the irony that her actual military training was being pathologized as mental illness. "I was just trying to get home safely, doctor." The young man was intoxicated and wouldn't let me pass. Of course. Dr. Hoffman nodded sympathetically. "But witnesses say you—" "Well, they say you handled the situation in a way that seemed almost professional. That concerns me, because it suggests you might be developing coping mechanisms that could put you in danger. Trauma victims sometimes overcompensate by learning self-defense, or becoming overly prepared for threats that may not actually exist." The doctor's assessment quickly spread through Millhaven's Medical and Social Services Network. Within a week, Cass found herself the subject of well-meaning but increasingly invasive attempts at intervention. Social worker Amanda Burke, who split her time between Millhaven and 2 neighboring counties, made an unannounced visit to Petals Stems on a busy Friday afternoon. Burke had built her career on identifying at-risk individuals who were struggling to ask for help, and everything she had heard about Cass Reynolds fit the profile perfectly. "Miss Reynolds, I hope you don't mind the interruption," Burke said, her voice carrying the practiced warmth of someone who dealt with crisis situations daily. "I work with the county's trauma support services, and several community members have expressed concern about your well-being." Cass continued arranging a funeral spray, her hands steady as she wired white lily into place. "I appreciate their concern, but I'm doing well. Is there something specific I can help you with?" Burke pulled out a tablet and began scrolling through what appeared to be an extensive case file. "Well, there have been several incidents that suggest you might be struggling with some form of post-traumatic stress. The physical altercation last month, reports of unusual strength and awareness, difficulty forming close relationships in the community. These are all classic signs of someone who's been through significant trauma and is using maladaptive coping strategies." The social worker's visit was just the beginning. Pastor McKenna, who had initially seen Cass as a lost soul needing spiritual guidance, now upgraded his assessment to someone requiring immediate pastoral intervention. He began stopping by the flower shop twice a week, ostensibly to discuss flower arrangements for church services, but actually to conduct what he considered informal counseling sessions. "My child," he said during one of these visits, his tone heavy with concern, "I've been praying about your situation, and I believe the Lord is calling me to help you work through whatever darkness you're carrying. The way you handled that young man outside the tavern, that kind of response comes from a place of deep pain. Violence, even in self-defense, leaves scars on the soul." Police Chief Kellerman took a different, but equally misguided approach. Having decided that Cass was clearly a victim of previous violence who had overcompensated by learning dangerous self-defense techniques, he assigned Deputy Martinez to conduct what he called protective surveillance. Martinez was instructed to drive past the flower shop every 2 hours and to file reports on any unusual activity or concerning behavior. "The last thing we need is for her to hurt someone because she's having some kind of flashback," Kellerman explained to his small force during their weekly briefing. "Women who've been through domestic violence sometimes develop these aggressive responses. It's not their fault, but it can be dangerous for everyone involved. We need to keep an eye on her for her own protection and for public safety." Deputy Martinez found herself in the uncomfortable position of essentially stalking someone she was supposed to be protecting. She would park across from Petals Stems and file reports that grew increasingly elaborate in their attempts to identify concerning behavior. Subject observed lifting heavy flower delivery with excessive ease, possible indication of compulsive physical training as trauma response. Subject maintains perfect posture, and scans environment constantly, signs of hypervigilance. Subject appears calm during busy periods. When normal people would show stress, possible emotional numbing, the most damaging. Escalation came from an unexpected source, the three criminals, who had been planning to kidnap Cass for ransom. Vincent Torino had heard about the college student incident through his network of contacts in nearby cities, and rather than seeing it as a warning sign, he interpreted it as confirmation that his target was mentally unstable and therefore even more vulnerable. "This is perfect," Vinny told his accomplices as they reviewed their surveillance notes in their motel room. "She's not just weak, she's crazy. Probably has some kind of PTSD or something that makes her flip out randomly. That means she's unpredictable, which actually makes her easier to control because she won't be thinking clearly." Derek Holbrook agreed enthusiastically. "My cousin did time with a guy who said women with trauma histories are the easiest marks. They're already broken, so they don't fight back the same way normal people do. They just kind of shut down when bad things happen." Tommy Morrison's analysis was characteristically crude, but reflected the group's growing confidence. "So she's got some kind of mental problems that make her think she's tough sometimes, but she's still just a crazy chick running a flower shop. Probably makes her even more scared of real men when it comes down to it. We just need to be ready for her to act weird before she breaks down." Completely. The criminals' misinterpretation of the available information led them to modify their plans in ways that they believed would make the kidnapping easier. They decided to approach during daylight hours when Cass would be alone in the shop, reasoning that her mental instability would make her less likely to resist or call for help if confronted with overwhelming force. Meanwhile, the legitimate authorities in Millhaven were developing their own problematic strategies. Fire Chief Anderson, working with Chief Kellerman, established what they called a community safety protocol specifically focused on managing what they perceived as Cass's psychological instability. "We need to treat her like someone who's potentially dangerous to herself and others," Anderson explained to his volunteers during a training session. "She's clearly got some kind of combat training from whatever happened to her before she came here, but she's applying it in civilian situations where it's not appropriate. Our job is to de-escalate any future incidents and get her the professional help she needs." The protocol included specific instructions for responding to any calls involving Cass, treating her as both a victim and a potential threat. Emergency responders were briefed on techniques for approaching trauma victims who might have military-style defensive training and were instructed to always respond with multiple units to ensure they could safely restrain her if she had another episode. Even the business community joined what had become a coordinated effort to manage their troubled neighbor. The Chamber of Commerce held a special meeting to discuss what they termed the Cassidy Reynolds situation, with local business owners sharing strategies for interacting with someone they believed was mentally unstable but potentially dangerous. Bill Davidson from the hardware store reported that he had stopped trying to sell Cass security equipment because it might trigger some kind of paranoid response. Martha Whitfield from the bed and breakfast warned other business owners that sudden movements or loud noises seemed to put her on high alert and recommended speaking in calm, quiet voices when serving her. Frank Brennan implemented what he called special handling procedures at his market, instructing employees to avoid surprising Cass and to always approach her from the front where she could see them coming. "We don't want to accidentally trigger whatever defensive training she picked up during her trauma," he explained. "Better safe than sorry." The most troubling development was the formation of what Pastor McKenna called a community intervention team. This group, consisting of Dr. Hoffman, social worker Burke, Chief Kellerman, and several prominent citizens, began meeting weekly to discuss strategies for getting Cass into mandatory psychological treatment. She's clearly a danger to herself and potentially to others. Dr. Hoffman argued during one of these meetings. The fact that she refuses to acknowledge her problems or seek help suggests that her condition is deteriorating. We may need to consider involuntary commitment for evaluation. Chief Kellerman was reluctant to go that far, but agreed that more aggressive intervention might be necessary. I've got my deputy watching her, and the reports are concerning. She's exhibiting all the signs of someone who's trained for violence, but doesn't have the psychological framework to handle it appropriately. It's only a matter of time before someone gets seriously hurt. As spring approached, Millhaven had transformed its gentle concern for their quiet florist into a coordinated campaign to save Cassidy Reynolds from herself. Every act of competence was reinterpreted as a symptom of mental illness. Every moment of calm was seen as dangerous emotional suppression. Every sign of strength was viewed as evidence of a damaged psyche overcompensating for trauma. The community that had once simply underestimated her capabilities now actively pathologized them, creating an environment where Cass found herself under constant scrutiny and pressure to accept treatment for conditions she didn't have. The stage was set for a confrontation that would force everyone in Millhaven to confront just how wrong they had been about the woman they thought they were trying to protect. Late that Tuesday evening, after the last customer had left and the closed sign had been flipped, Cassidy Reynolds stood alone in the back room of Petals and Stems, surrounded by the tools of her carefully constructed civilian life. The space was immaculate as always, flower shears arranged by size, ribbons organized by color, water buckets lined up with military precision that she couldn't quite suppress even after 3 years of practice. She moved to a locked filing cabinet in the corner, one that the numerous well-meaning visitors to her shop had never paid attention to. Using a key she wore on a chain around her neck, hidden beneath her modest blouses, Cass opened the bottom drawer and withdrew a weathered manila folder that contained the only reminders of who she really was. The first document was her honorable discharge papers from the United States Navy, dated 3 years and 4 months ago. The official letterhead bore the seal of Naval Special Warfare Command, and the signature belonged to Admiral Richard Hawthorne, a man who had once told her she was the finest operator he had ever had the privilege to command. Beneath the discharge papers lay her service record, a document that would have shocked every person in Millhaven who thought they knew quiet Cassidy Reynolds. 12 years of active duty, 4 deployments to classified locations in the Middle East, 2 Bronze Stars, 1 Silver Star, and a Purple Heart that she had earned during an extraction mission in Somalia that had gone catastrophically wrong. But it was the last entry in her service record that carried the most weight. Lieutenant Commander Cassidy J. Reynolds, SEAL Team 6, Bravo Squadron. Specialized in high-value target extraction, urban warfare, and advanced reconnaissance. Promoted to Squadron Operations Officer following successful completion of Operation Night Hunter. Cass ran her fingers over the words, remembering the weight of the rank insignia she had once worn with such pride. Lieutenant Commander Reynolds had led teams of the world's most elite warriors through missions that existed only in heavily classified files. She had made decisions that affected international security, had been trusted with intelligence that could destabilize governments, had carried the responsibility for bringing her people home alive from places where capture meant torture and death. The woman who now arranged flowers for church weddings had once breached terrorist compounds in the dead of night, moving through hostile territory with the silence of a ghost and the lethality of a predator. The gentle florist who spoke softly to elderly customers had once called in airstrikes with coordinates that she calculated in her head. While under heavy enemy fire from the folder, she withdrew a photograph that had been taken during her final deployment, 6 months before everything changed. It showed her standing with her team in front of a helicopter somewhere in Afghanistan, her face painted with desert camouflage, carrying equipment that cost more than most people's houses. She was smiling in the photo, surrounded by men and women who would have followed her into hell because they knew she had the skills and judgment to lead them back out. Staff: Sergeant Maria Gonzalez, her communications specialist who had died in her arms during that final mission. Petty Officer First Class David Chun, her demolitions expert, who had saved the entire team by throwing himself on a grenade meant for their extraction helicopter. Chief Petty Officer James Mitchell, her sniper, who had covered their retreat with shots that defied physics and probability. They were all gone now. Victims of intelligence that had been wrong. A mission that had been compromised before they ever set foot on the ground. Operation Night Hunter was supposed to have been a routine extraction of a captured CIA operative from a Taliban stronghold in the mountains near the Pakistani border. Instead, it had become a massacre that had claimed 6 of the finest warriors Cass had ever known. She had been the only survivor, pulled from the wreckage of their downed helicopter by a rescue team that found her unconscious and barely breathing, her body covering the wounded CIA operative she had died trying to save. The man had lived. Her team had not. The weight of that mathematics had nearly destroyed her. The official after-action report, also in her folder, told the sanitized version of the story. Despite overwhelming enemy resistance and the loss of her entire team, Lieutenant Commander Reynolds successfully completed the primary mission objective and secured the safe extraction of the target. Her actions under fire exemplified the highest traditions of naval special warfare and saved the life of a valuable intelligence asset. What the report didn't mention was the 3 months she had spent in a military hospital, not just healing from her physical wounds, but fighting a battle against the ghosts of her fallen comrades that was far more difficult than anything she had faced in combat. The nightmares, the survivor's guilt, the crushing weight of command decisions that had led good people to their deaths. Dr. Captain Elizabeth Morrison, the Navy psychiatrist who had treated her, had recommended an immediate return to active duty. Commander Reynolds shows no signs of PTSD or combat stress reaction, the evaluation read. She has processed the loss of her team in a healthy manner and is fully capable of returning to operational status. I recommend reassignment to a new squadron at her earliest convenience. But Cass had known something that the psychiatrist missed, something that no amount of professional evaluation could detect. She wasn't broken by what had happened. She was changed by it. The woman who had once lived for the adrenaline of high-stakes missions, who had found purpose in the brotherhood of elite warriors, had discovered that she no longer wanted to be responsible for putting good people in harm's way. The final document in her folder was her letter of resignation, submitted 6 months after Operation Night Hunter. It was addressed to Admiral Hawthorne personally, and reading it now, 3 years later, still brought back the emotions she had felt while writing it. Admiral, I am hereby submitting my resignation from active duty and requesting immediate discharge from Naval Special Warfare Command. This decision does not stem from any loss of confidence in the mission or the capabilities of our forces, but rather from a personal recognition that I am no longer the officer my teams deserve. I have given 12 years of my life to serving something greater than myself, and I have been honored to lead some of the finest warriors our nation has ever produced. But I can no longer bear the responsibility of sending good people into harm's way, knowing that some of them will not come home. The weight of command has become heavier than I can carry while maintaining the judgment and objectivity that our missions require. I do not consider this a failure, but rather a recognition that there comes a time when every warrior must choose a different way to serve. I intend to find that way in civilian life, where I can use the skills and discipline the Navy has given me to help people, in ways that don't require them to risk their lives for my decisions. Admiral Hawthorne had called her personally after receiving the letter, spending 2 hours on the phone trying to convince her to reconsider. "Cass, you're one of the finest officers I've ever served with," he had said. "What happened to your team wasn't your fault. The intelligence was wrong. The mission was compromised from the start. You saved that CIA operative's life and conducted a fighting withdrawal that will be studied at the War College for decades. Don't let one bad mission end a career that's meant everything to naval special warfare." But her mind had been made up. The woman who had once thrived on missions where failure meant death had chosen a different path, one where her biggest risk was a pricked finger from a rose thorn. She had traded her tactical gear for gardening gloves, her night vision goggles for reading glasses, her assault rifle for flower shears. Millhaven had seemed like the perfect place to disappear, to become someone new. A small town where nobody asked too many questions about your past, where the most dangerous thing that happened was the occasional drunk driver or domestic dispute. She had deliberately chosen a profession that required patience and gentleness, skills that would help her remember that there was beauty in the world worth protecting without violence. The flower shop wasn't just a business, it was therapy. Every arrangement she created was a small act of bringing beauty into someone's life. Every wedding bouquet represented hope and new beginnings. Every funeral spray was a way of honoring lives lost without adding to the body count that haunted her dreams. For 3 years, the strategy had worked. Lieutenant Commander Reynolds had successfully disappeared, replaced by gentle Cassidy, who arranged flowers and minded her own business. The nightmares had faded, replaced by peaceful sleep in a cottage surrounded by gardens instead of razor wire. The hypervigilance that had kept her alive in combat zones had softened into simple awareness of her quiet surroundings. But as she sat in her flower shop, holding the remnants of her former life, Cass knew that the careful peace she had built was about to be tested. The town's growing concern about her mental health was becoming harder to deflect. Dr. Hoffman's increasingly aggressive attempts at intervention were attracting attention from county authorities. Chief Kellerman's surveillance was making it difficult to maintain her low profile. More troubling were the 3 men she had noticed conducting surveillance on her shop over the past few weeks. Her tactical training had identified them as a threat long before they made their move, but Lieutenant Commander Reynolds would have already neutralized them. Gentle Cassidy the florist was supposed to be incapable of such decisive action. She carefully returned the documents to their folder and locked it away. But not before removing one item, a small tactical knife that had been a gift from her team before their final mission. It was razor sharp, perfectly balanced, and engraved with the seal trident that had once been the most important symbol in her life. Looking at the knife now, Cass faced the question that had been building for weeks. When the moment came, who would she choose to be? The gentle florist who had found peace in a small town, or the warrior who had sworn an oath to protect the innocent? She had a feeling that very soon, Millhaven was about to find out which version of Cassidy Reynolds was real. Wednesday morning arrived with the deceptive calm that often precedes violence. Cassidy had opened Petals and Stems at her usual 7 a.m., arranging the day's featured spring flowers in the window display while keeping one eye on the street. Her tactical awareness, honed by years of operations in hostile territory, had detected the subtle changes in the surveillance pattern over the past 48 hours. The 3 men watching her shop had shifted from casual observation to active preparation. Vincent Torino sat in the stolen panel van parked 2 blocks away, running through the plan one final time with his accomplices. "Remember, we go in fast and quiet," he instructed Derek and Tommy, checking his watch. "She opens at 7. First customer usually doesn't show up until 8:30. That gives us plenty of time to get her secured and out of there before anyone notices." Derek Holbrook nervously adjusted the zip ties and duct tape in his backpack, his hands shaking slightly from a combination of adrenaline and the methamphetamine he had consumed for courage. What if she screams? What if someone hears? She won't scream, Tommy Morrison grunted, cracking his knuckles with anticipation. Fragile little flower girls don't scream when real men walk into their safe spaces. They freeze up, go into shock. We'll have her trussed up and in the van before she even knows what's happening. The plan was simple in its brutality. They would enter through the front door during the quiet morning hours when Cass was alone. Vincent would control the front of the shop and serve as lookout. Derek would handle restraints and transportation logistics, and Tommy would intimidate their target into compliance. They had prepared a story about being delivery men if anyone saw them entering, and they had mapped escape routes through 3 different counties. At 8:15 a.m., Vincent gave the signal. The 3 men exited the van and walked toward Petals and Stems with the casual confidence of predators who believed they had chosen the perfect prey. They had spent weeks convincing themselves that they understood exactly what they were dealing with, a traumatized woman whose small displays of competence were actually signs of mental instability that would work in their favor. Cass saw them coming before they reached the sidewalk. Her peripheral vision caught the synchronized movement, the way they approached with too much purpose for casual customers, the subtle positioning that indicated tactical coordination. These weren't amateur criminals stumbling into an opportunity. They were experienced operators executing a planned assault for a moment that lasted an eternity. Lieutenant Commander Reynolds and florist Cassidy existed simultaneously in the same body. The warrior recognized the threat assessment, calculated odds, and began planning countermeasures. The civilian hoped she was wrong, that these were simply rude customers or aggressive salesmen who could be handled with polite deflection. The decision was taken away from her when Vincent pushed through the front door with enough force to make the bell above it ring violently. His eyes immediately locked onto Cass behind the counter, and she saw the predatory satisfaction in his expression as he confirmed that his target was exactly where intelligence had predicted. "Morning, sweetheart," Vincent said, his voice carrying the false friendliness that preceded violence. "We need to have a little conversation with you. Nothing to worry about if you cooperate." Derek entered second, moving immediately to flip the door sign from open to closed and drawing the window shades with practiced efficiency. Tommy came last, his massive frame filling the doorway as he positioned himself to block any escape attempt. Cass stood perfectly, still behind the counter, her hands resting gently on the work surface among scattered flower stems and design tools. To the 3 men, she appeared frozen with fear, exactly the reaction they had expected from their carefully profiled victim. They couldn't see that her stillness was the absolute calm of a predator, evaluating threats and calculating the most efficient response. "Please," she said quietly, her voice carrying just the right amount of tremor to reinforce their expectations. "I don't have much money in the register. Take whatever you want and leave." Vincent laughed, a sound filled with contempt and anticipation. "Oh, this isn't about the petty cash, flower girl. You're worth a lot more than whatever's in that old register. See, we know all about you. Single woman, no family, runs a nice little business. Someone's gonna pay good money to get you back in one piece." Derek was already pulling zip ties from his backpack, his movements quick and nervous. "We're gonna take a little trip together," he explained with the tone of someone trying to sound reasonable while committing a felony. "Nothing personal, just business. You cooperate, stay quiet, and in a few days you'll be back here arranging your pretty flowers like nothing happened." Tommy stepped closer to the counter, using his intimidating size to emphasize the threat. "Course, if you don't cooperate, things get a lot less pleasant for everyone involved. Your choice, lady. Easy way or hard way." Cass looked at each of them in turn, her expression showing exactly the kind of frightened confusion they expected. Internally, Lieutenant Commander Reynolds was conducting a tactical assessment that would have impressed her former commanding officers. 3 targets, all male. Approximate ages 35 to 45. Primary threat positioned at the door with clear sight lines to the street, armed with what appeared to be a concealed pistol, based on the weight distribution in his jacket. Secondary threat controlling entry-exit with restraint materials, likely carrying a knife based on the outline in his back pocket. Tertiary threat using intimidation tactics, no visible weapons, but significantly larger than the others. Probably relies on physical force. The flower shop itself provided multiple tactical advantages that the criminals hadn't considered. Heavy ceramic vases that could serve as improvised weapons. Sharp cutting tools within easy reach. Multiple exit routes through the back room that led to an alley the surveillance team hadn't properly scouted. Most importantly, thick walls that would muffle sound and buy her time to neutralize the threats without alerting the community that was already too concerned about her mental state. "I understand," Cass said softly, taking a small step back from the counter. "You want money for my return. How much are you asking for?" Vincent's grin widened as he interpreted her question as acceptance of the situation. "Smart girl. We're thinking 50,000 should be reasonable for someone like you. Nice round number that shows we're professionals but not greedy." $50,000, Cass repeated, nodding as if considering the logistics. That's a lot of money. Who exactly do you think is going to pay that for me?" Derek was getting impatient, pulling out a length of rope to supplement the zip ties. "That's not your problem, lady. Someone will pay. Someone always pays when it's someone like you, respectable, established, the kind of person whose disappearance gets attention." Tommy moved closer, reaching across the counter to grab her wrist. "Enough talking. Time to go for a ride." The moment his fingers made contact with her arm, the careful balance that Cassidy had maintained for 3 years shattered completely. The touch triggered muscle memory that had been drilled into her through thousands of hours of close-quarters combat training. Her body responded before her mind had time to choose between her two identities. Tommy found his wrist locked in a grip that felt like a steel trap, twisted at an angle that sent shooting pain up his arm and forced him onto his toes to avoid having bones broken. His eyes widened in shock as he stared at the woman who seconds earlier had seemed like a frightened victim. "Let me go," he gasped, trying to pull away and discovering that his 250-pound frame was completely immobilized by someone who weighed at least 70 pounds less than he did. Cass looked directly into his eyes, and for the first time since entering the shop, all 3 criminals saw something that didn't match their assessment of their target. The frightened florist was gone, replaced by someone whose gaze carried the cold calculation of a person who had faced far worse threats than 3 small-town criminals. "I need you to listen very carefully," she said, her voice completely steady now. "You have approximately 5 seconds to release your friends and walk out of my shop. After that, this situation becomes much more complicated for all of you." Vincent reached for the pistol in his jacket, his confidence shaken but his greed still driving him forward. "You think you're some kind of tough girl?" "Tommy, handle this crazy." He never finished the sentence. Cass released Tommy's wrist and moved with fluid precision that transformed her flower shop into a combat zone. The 3 men who had entered believing they controlled the situation were about to learn that they had just forced the most dangerous person in Millhaven County to stop pretending to be someone else. The forced participation they had planned had indeed occurred, but they were about to discover they had chosen the wrong roles in this particular scenario. Lieutenant Commander Reynolds was no longer hiding behind the gentle facade of Cassidy the florist, and 3 criminals were about to face the full consequences of that tactical error. What happened next in Petals and Stems would be analyzed and debated by law enforcement professionals for years to come, though the official reports would never capture the true scope of what 3 criminals experienced when they forced a Navy SEAL to abandon her cover. Identity. Vincent's hand was halfway to his concealed pistol when Cassidy moved. The transformation was so complete and instantaneous that it seemed like a different person had suddenly materialized behind the flower shop counter. The gentle florist who had arranged their funeral sprays and wedding bouquets vanished, replaced by someone whose every movement carried the lethal precision of 12 years in naval special warfare. She vaulted over the counter with fluid grace, her body moving in ways that defied the criminal's understanding of human capability. Tommy, still nursing his twisted wrist, attempted to grab her as she landed, but found himself grasping empty air as Cass flowed around his reach like water, positioning herself where she could engage all three targets without being flanked. Vincent cleared his pistol from his jacket, a .38 revolver that he had carried for 10 years and never actually fired in anger. His confidence evaporated the moment he saw Cass's reaction to the weapon. Instead of the terror or compliance he expected, she assessed the threat with the calm professionalism of someone who had faced automatic weapons fire in narrow Afghan valleys. "Drop the gun," she said, her voice carrying an authority that seemed to fill the small shop. Last warning. Vincent's response was to raise the pistol toward her center mass, but the motion felt clumsy and slow compared to the predatory stillness of his intended victim. "You drop, lady. On the ground, hands behind your head, or I put a bullet in you right here." Cass tilted her head slightly, and for a moment her expression showed something that might have been disappointment. Then she moved. The distance between them was 12 feet. Vincent later told investigators that 1 second she was standing still with her hands at her sides, and the next second the gun was no longer in his possession and he was face down on the floor with his arm twisted behind his back in a position that made his shoulder socket feel like it was about to separate. Derek, who had been fumbling with zip ties near the front door, watched in frozen horror as the woman he had helped plan to kidnap disarmed his partner with movements that seemed to blur together. His brain struggled to process what he was seeing. This wasn't the frightened florist who was supposed to collapse in terror at the first sign of violence. "Tommy, do something!" Derek screamed, backing against the door and trying to reach the knife in his back pocket. Tommy Morrison had built his criminal reputation on physical intimidation. At 6 feet 4 inches and 250 pounds, he had never encountered someone he couldn't overpower through brute force and aggression. He charged toward Cass with the confidence of someone who believed size always trumped skill. Cass stepped into his attack rather than away from it, using his momentum against him in a way that transformed his aggressive rush into a controlled fall. Tommy found himself airborne for a brief, confused moment before hitting the hardwood floor with an impact that knocked the wind from his lungs and left him staring at the ceiling, trying to understand how someone half his weight had thrown him across the room. "Stay down," Cass advised quietly, though Tommy was too dazed to consider doing anything else. Derek finally managed to draw his, a 4-inch folding blade that he had purchased at a truck stop and practiced with by stabbing cardboard boxes. He held it in front of him with shaking hands, the point wavering as he tried to decide whether to attack or flee. "I've got a knife," he announced unnecessarily, his voice cracking with panic. "I know how to use it." Cass looked at the blade with the same professional assessment she had given Vincent's pistol. Derek's grip was wrong, his stance was unstable, and his fear was making him telegraph his intentions with every nervous twitch. She had been trained by instructors who could kill with everything from specialized combat knives to broken bottles, and Derek's truck stop special posed about as much threat as the flower shears on her workbench. "Put it down," she said simply. "You're going to hurt yourself." Derek's response was a wild, desperate lunge that he hoped would connect with something vital. Instead, he found his wrist captured in a grip that felt like it was made of steel cables. The knife clattered to the floor as pressure points in his hand were activated with surgical precision, causing his fingers to open involuntarily, within 30 seconds of Vincent drawing his weapon. All three criminals were on the floor of Petals and Stems, disarmed and immobilized by someone they had profiled as an easy victim. The flower shop that had been filled with the gentle sounds of classical music and the rustle of tissue paper now echoed with the groans of three men whose worldview had just been comprehensively shattered. Cass stood in the center of the shop, breathing steadily and showing no signs of exertion despite having just neutralized three armed attackers. Her clothes were barely wrinkled, her hair was still neatly in place, and the only indication that violence had occurred was the three men on her floor and the scattered flower arrangements that had been disturbed during the brief confrontation. Vincent, his face pressed against the hardwood and his arms still twisted behind his back, tried to make sense of what had just happened. "What the hell are you?" he gasped, the question forced out through gritted teeth. Cass considered the question seriously. For 3 years, she had been Cassidy Reynolds, gentle florist and trauma victim who needed protection from the harsh realities of the world. For the 30 seconds of combat that had just concluded, she had been Lieutenant Commander Reynolds, naval special warfare operator trained to neutralize threats with maximum efficiency and minimum collateral damage. "I'm someone who wanted to arrange flowers and be left alone," she said finally. "You didn't give me that option." Tommy managed to roll onto his side, staring up at her with a mixture of pain and bewilderment. "You're not. This isn't possible. We watched you for weeks. You're just a flower shop lady. You're supposed to be crazy, not whatever this is." The comment about being watched confirmed what Cass had suspected about the surveillance, but she filed that information away for later analysis. More immediately concerning was Tommy's reference to her being crazy, an indication that the town's growing concerns about her mental health had somehow reached the criminal community. Derek, nursing his wrist and looking like he might vomit from shock, voiced what all three men were thinking. "Nobody moves like that. Nobody fights like that. What kind of training do you have?" Before Cass could answer, the bell above the front door chimed as someone entered the shop. Deputy Sarah Martinez stepped inside, drawn by reports of a disturbance, and froze as she took in the scene before her. Three men on the floor in various states of restraint, scattered flowers and overturned displays, and Cassidy Reynolds standing calmly in the middle of it, all like the eye of a hurricane. "Miss Reynolds?" Martinez said slowly, her hand instinctively moving toward her service weapon. What happened here?" Cass looked at the deputy with the same calm expression she had maintained throughout the confrontation. "These men attempted to kidnap me for ransom. I defended myself." Martinez's training told her to secure the scene, call for backup, and sort out the details later. But her eyes told her something that her brain was struggling to process. The three men on the floor were clearly the aggressors. They were armed. They had restraint materials, and they were obviously not customers browsing for flower arrangements. But the way they had been neutralized, the precision with which they had been disarmed and immobilized, suggested skills that went far beyond basic self-defense. "Are you injured?" Martinez asked, though Cass showed no signs of having been in a fight at all. "No," Cass replied simply. "They are not seriously injured either, though they may require medical evaluation." Vincent tried to speak from his position on the floor, but his words came out as an incoherent mixture of pain and disbelief. Derek was still staring at Cass like she was some kind of supernatural entity. Tommy had closed his eyes and appeared to be questioning his life choices. Martinez keyed her radio to call for backup and an ambulance. But her attention remained fixed on the woman she had spent months watching for signs of dangerous instability. The gentle florist who was supposed to be suffering from trauma-induced delusions had just single-handedly neutralized three armed criminals with a level of efficiency that Martinez had never seen outside of specialized law enforcement training videos. "Miss Reynolds," Martinez said carefully, "I'm going to need you to explain exactly how this happened." Cass nodded, understanding that the careful balance she had maintained for 3 years was now completely destroyed. There would be questions, investigations, background checks, and eventually the truth about Lieutenant Commander Reynolds would emerge. The peaceful life she had built in Millhaven was over, ended by 3 criminals who had forced her to choose between maintaining her cover and protecting herself. But as she looked around her flower shop, at the scattered roses and overturned vases, at the 3 men who had underestimated her so completely, at the deputy whose entire understanding of reality was being reconstructed in real time, Cass realized something unexpected. For the first time in 3 years, she felt completely, authentically herself. "I'll explain everything," she said to Martinez. "But you might want to sit down first." The news of what had happened at Petals and Stems spread through Millhaven like wildfire. But the initial reports were so contradictory and unbelievable that most residents assumed the details had been exaggerated in the telling. 3 armed criminals subdued by the gentle florist? Impossible. There had to be more to the story. Perhaps the police had arrived just in time. Or maybe the criminals had simply been incompetent. But 2 hours after the incident, while Cass was giving her statement to a rapidly growing collection of law enforcement officials, a crisis emerged that would test not just her revealed abilities, but her character and commitment to the community that had unknowingly sheltered her for 3 years. Sheriff's deputy Tom Richardson burst through the door of the police station where Cass was being interviewed, his face flushed with panic and exertion. "Chief, we've got a situation at Millhaven Elementary. Multiple armed suspects, possible hostage scenario. They're asking for federal response, but the nearest tactical team is 3 hours out." Chief Kellerman, who had been struggling to process the morning's revelations about his supposedly fragile flower shop owner, felt his stomach drop. "How many suspects? What are we looking at?" "Initial reports say 4, maybe 5 armed men. They've barricaded themselves in the main hallway with approximately 30 children and 6 teachers. Witnesses say they're heavily armed, assault rifles, body armor, the works. This isn't some domestic dispute or robbery gone wrong. These guys came prepared for war." The room fell silent as everyone absorbed the implications. Millhaven's police force consisted of Chief Kellerman, 3 deputies, and 2 part-time officers. They were equipped and trained to handle traffic violations, domestic disputes, and the occasional drunk and disorderly. A coordinated assault by heavily armed militants was beyond their capabilities. Training and equipment. FBI agent Sarah Chun, who had driven down from Portland to investigate the flower shop incident, immediately took charge. "I need complete intel on the school layout, number of potential hostages, and any communication attempts. We need to establish a perimeter and wait for federal tactical response." 3 hours, Deputy Richardson repeated. "Those kids don't have 3 hours." Agent Chun understood the math as well as anyone in the room. Hostage situations involving children had notoriously short windows before they turned into massacres. Whatever demands the armed group intended to make, they would likely demonstrate their seriousness by harming hostages if their timeline wasn't met. What about the state police tactical team? Chief Kellerman asked desperately. "Already deployed to a bank robbery situation in Salem," Richardson replied. "We're on our own until federal assets can be repositioned." From her chair in the corner of the room, where she had been quietly answering questions about her military background, Cass listened to the developing crisis with growing alarm. The elementary school was 6 blocks from her flower shop. She had donated arrangements for their spring concert just 2 weeks ago. She knew many of those children by name, had watched them grow up during her 3 years in ILLHAVEN. 8-year-old Emma Patterson, whose father Jake had tried to ask Cass out and whose mother brought her to the flower shop every Mother's Day to pick out a special bouquet. 10-year-old Marcus Chun, Agent Chun's nephew, who was visiting from Portland and staying with his grandparents. 6-year-old Lily Henderson, the granddaughter of Mrs. Henderson from the bakery, who always pressed her nose against the flower shop window to watch Cass work. "Agent Chun," Cass said quietly, causing everyone in the room to turn toward her. "What's the current tactical assessment?" Chun looked at her with the wariness of someone still processing the morning's revelations. "I'm sorry, but that's classified operational information. We appreciate your cooperation with the earlier incident, but this is a federal matter now. I have Level 5 security clearance through Naval Special Warfare Command," Cass replied evenly. "My clearance should still be active unless specifically revoked." Chief Kellerman stared at her in bewilderment. "Level 5 clearance? What the hell does that mean?" Agent Chun was already on her phone, running a rapid background check through federal databases. Her expression changed as the information came back. "Lieutenant Commander Cassidy J. Reynolds, Naval Special Warfare. Classified operational history, multiple commendations for." Jesus Christ. She looked up from her phone with a mixture of awe and disbelief. "Why didn't you mention this during your initial statement?" "Because until this morning, I was retired," Cass said simply. "But those children don't care about my retirement status." Agent Chun quickly briefed her on the tactical situation. The armed group had entered through the main entrance during morning assembly, when all the younger grades were gathered in the central hallway for announcements. They had immediately herded everyone into the library, which had only one entrance and heavy wooden doors that could be easily defended. Initial demands had been confusing and seemingly nonsensical, something about government corruption and making a statement that the world would remember. Classic domestic terrorist profile, Chun concluded. Probably planning to livestream whatever they do next. They've got good tactical positioning, superior firepower, and 36 innocent hostages including children as young as 5 years old. Cass closed her eyes and visualized the school layout from memory. She had visited multiple times for various community events and had unconsciously cataloged the building's tactical features, a habit she couldn't shake even in civilian life. The library was indeed a strong defensive position, but it also had weaknesses that properly trained operators could exploit. "The ventilation system," she said without opening her eyes. 1970s construction, large enough for human passage, connects to an access point in the janitor's closet approximately 40 feet from the library's rear wall. The air ducts have been updated with modern filtering systems, which means the passages are clear and well maintained. Agent Chun pulled up building schematics on her tablet and confirmed the layout. "How do you know this?" "I helped repair a ventilation issue during the winter festival." The janitor mentioned that the system was designed for easy maintenance access. Cass opened her eyes and looked directly at Chun. "I can get inside, assess the situation, and potentially neutralize the threats before they realize they've been compromised." "Absolutely not," Chief Kellerman interjected. "You're a civilian now, and this is way beyond anything we can ask of you. We wait for the federal tactical team. Those children will be dead before federal response arrives," Cass said quietly. "You know it, I know it, and Agent Chun knows it. This is exactly the kind of scenario that terrorist groups use to maximize media impact and psychological damage." Agent Chun was studying the building schematics with growing interest. "What would you need?" "Access to the school through the rear maintenance entrance, which should still be unlocked. It's controlled by a magnetic lock that defaults to open during power outages. A communication device so I can coordinate with you. And about 20 minutes. 20 minutes to do what?" Richardson asked. Cass looked around the room at the faces of people who had spent 3 years thinking they knew exactly who she was. "To end this situation with minimal risk to the hostages." "That's insane," Kellerman protested. "You'd be going in alone against multiple armed suspects. Even if you are some kind of special forces soldier, the odds are completely against you." "Chief," Cass said patiently, "those odds are exactly why I spent 12 years training for situations like this. Those children are in that library because the people holding them believe that overwhelming firepower and good tactical positioning make them invulnerable. They're about to learn that they made some incorrect assumptions." Agent Chun was running rapid calculations in her head. Federal response was still 2.5 hours out. State assets were unavailable. Local law enforcement was completely outmatched. The tactical situation was deteriorating rapidly, and intelligence suggested that the armed group was on a timeline that wouldn't wait for proper backup to arrive. "This is completely against protocol," she said finally. "Protocol assumes you have trained operators and proper equipment available," Cass replied. "You have one trained operator and the equipment available in a small-town police station. Sometimes you work with what you have." Agent Chun looked at Chief Kellerman, who was clearly struggling with the concept of sending the woman he'd spent months trying to get into psychiatric treatment on a solo mission against armed terrorists. "If I authorize this," Chun said slowly, "you understand that you'll be operating without backup, without proper equipment, and without any guarantee of extraction if things go wrong." Cass stood up from her chair, and for the first time since entering the police station, everyone in the room could see Lieutenant Commander Reynolds clearly. Her posture was different, her movements were precise, and her eyes carried the focused intensity of someone who had spent years making life-and-death decisions under impossible circumstances. "Agent Chun," she said quietly, "those children are my community. Those teachers helped organize the fundraiser that let me open my flower shop. That school is 6 blocks from where I've lived peacefully for 3 years. This isn't about protocol or proper equipment. This is about going home tonight, knowing I did everything possible to protect the people who welcomed me when I needed a place to heal." She paused, looking around the room one more time. "Besides, the alternative is waiting for a federal tactical team to arrive and finding out how many small coffins Millhaven's funeral home can arrange on short notice. I'd rather not find out." The room fell silent as everyone processed what she had just said. Outside, they could hear the distant sound of sirens as emergency responders established a perimeter around the elementary school. Time was running out, and everyone in the room knew it thought Agent Chun made a decision that would either save 36 lives or end her career. "What do you need from us?" 18 minutes after Cassidy Reynolds disappeared into the ventilation system of Millhaven Elementary School, the crisis was over. The details of what happened inside would remain classified in federal reports. But the results spoke for themselves. 5 armed terrorists neutralized, 36 hostages safe and unharmed, and not a single shot fired by the responding officers who had been prepared for the worst. Agent Chun was the first to see. Cass emerged from the rear maintenance entrance, escorting a line of children and teachers who walked in quiet, orderly fashion toward the waiting paramedics and anxious parents. The terrorists had been left secured in the library, unconscious but alive, their weapons safely cleared and their communications equipment disabled. "How?" was all Agent Chun managed to say when Cass approached the command post that had been hastily established in the school parking lot. "Concussion grenades aren't the only way to disorient targets," Cass replied quietly, brushing dust from the ventilation system off her flower shop apron. "Sometimes you just need to understand human psychology and the element of surprise." They were expecting a frontal assault by tactical teams. Not a single operator coming through the ceiling. Chief Kellerman, who had spent the longest 18 minutes of his career imagining the worst possible outcomes, stared at the woman he had ordered his deputy to surveil for mental health concerns. "The children, are they?" "They're fine," Cass assured him. "Scared, but unharmed. The teachers did an excellent job keeping them calm during the initial incident. Mrs. Patterson actually helped me coordinate the extraction by keeping the children organized and quiet." as word spread through Millhaven that the school crisis had been resolved. The story of how it happened began to transform the community's understanding of the woman they thought they knew. The gentle florist who had needed protection from her own traumatic past had single-handedly neutralized a terrorist threat that would have challenged experienced federal tactical teams. Dr. Patricia Hoffman was among the first to arrive at the scene, having rushed from her clinic when she heard about the school emergency. She found Cass sitting on the tailgate of an ambulance, declining medical attention while being debriefed by federal agents. The woman who Dr. Hoffman had diagnosed with severe trauma, responses and recommended for involuntary psychiatric evaluation, had just completed a mission that would be studied in counter-terrorism training programs. Cassidy, Dr. Hoffman said hesitantly, approaching with the careful manner of someone whose entire professional assessment had been proven catastrophically wrong. I owe you an apology. Several apologies, actually. Cass looked up from the federal forms she was signing. You were trying to help someone you thought needed it. There's nothing to apologize for. But I misdiagnosed everything, Dr. Hoffman continued, her voice filled with professional embarrassment. Your hypervigilance, your physical capabilities, your emotional control. I interpreted all of it as pathology when it was actually ... Training, Cass finished gently. You saw someone who responded to threats differently than civilians typically do, and you tried to help them. That's what good doctors do. By evening, word had spread throughout Millhaven about the true identity of their quiet florist. The revelation that Lieutenant Commander Cassidy Reynolds, decorated Navy SEAL and counterterrorism specialist, had been living among them for 3 years created a mixture of awe, embarrassment, and profound gratitude that would reshape the community's relationships for years to come. Jake Patterson was one of the first to visit Petals Stems after it reopened the following morning. He found Cass arranging flowers as if nothing had happened, though the bullet hole in the front window from the previous day's criminal incident served as a reminder that their peaceful town had experienced more violence in 24 hours than it typically saw in a decade. Cass, he said awkwardly, removing his hat as he entered, I wanted to thank you for everything, and to apologize for treating you like you needed protecting instead of recognizing that you were the one doing the protecting. Cass smiled, the same gentle expression she had worn for 3 years. Jake, you were being kind to someone you thought needed kindness. That's exactly the kind of person this community needs. But we got it so wrong, Jake protested. We thought you were fragile, maybe a little unstable. We had no idea you were. I was exactly who you thought I was, Cass interrupted softly. I came here broken, looking for a place to heal. You and everyone else in Millhaven gave me that place. The fact that I also happen to have certain skills doesn't change the kindness you showed to someone who needed it. Over the following weeks, Millhaven underwent a quiet transformation in how its residents understood both their community and the assumptions they made about the people in it. The community intervention team that had been planning to force Cass into psychiatric treatment disbanded with profound embarrassment, replaced by genuine efforts to better support actual trauma victims in the community. Pastor McKenna used the incident as the foundation for a series of sermons about the danger of judging others based on appearances and the importance of recognizing that everyone carries hidden depths. We spent 3 years looking at Lieutenant Commander Reynolds and seeing someone who needed our protection, he told his congregation. We never considered that she might be the one protecting us. Deputy Martinez, who had conducted surveillance on Cass for months, requested a transfer to a federal training program for small-town law enforcement officers. I want to learn how to actually recognize threats and assets, she told Chief Kellerman. If I can't tell the difference between a trauma victim and one of the most highly trained operators in the country, I need better training. The most significant change came in how Millhaven welcomed newcomers and supported people who seemed to be struggling with difficult pasts. The community established a proper trauma counseling program, volunteer support networks, and training for local officials on recognizing and responding to genuine mental health crises. The irony that their misdiagnosis of Cass had led to better support for people who actually needed help was not lost on anyone involved. Agent Shun visited Petals and Stems a month after the school incident, ostensibly to deliver final paperwork, but actually to satisfy her curiosity about how someone with Lieutenant Commander Reynolds' background had ended up arranging flowers in a small Oregon town. "Do you miss it?" Chun asked, watching Cass create a wedding bouquet with the same precise attention to detail she had probably once applied to mission planning. "I miss the sense of purpose," Cass admitted. "But I found that again here, just in a different form. Every arrangement I create brings joy to someone's life. Every funeral spray helps a family say goodbye. Every wedding bouquet celebrates new beginnings. It's still about serving others, just without the violence." "And after this week? Now that everyone knows who you really are?" Cass considered the question while adjusting white roses in the bouquet. "Nothing's really changed. I'm still the same person who came here looking for peace. The community is still the same group of people who offered sanctuary to someone they thought needed it. We just understand each other better now." Agent Chun nodded, though she suspected there was more to the story. "The federal government would be very interested in having you return to active duty. Your skills are considerable." "My skills will always be available if my community needs them," Cass replied firmly. "But my war ended 3 years ago when I lost my team. This is where I choose to serve now." 6 months later, Millhaven Elementary held its annual Spring Festival, featuring displays of student artwork, performances by the school choir, and a flower show judged by local gardening enthusiasts. Cass donated arrangements for every classroom and helped organize the event, working alongside the same teachers and parents she had once rescued from armed terrorists. The festival also featured a new tradition, a moment of silence for community protectors, both seen and unseen. Principal Sarah Moore, who had been one of the hostages in the library, spoke briefly about the importance of recognizing that heroes don't always look like what we expect them to look like. Sometimes, the people who protect us are the same people we see every day, she told the gathered families. Sometimes they're arranging our flowers, teaching our children, or serving our coffee. We don't always know who the guardians are in our community, but we should always treat each other with the respect and kindness that recognizes the possibility. After the festival, as Cass was packing up the remaining flower arrangements, 8-year-old Emma Patterson approached her with a drawing she had made during art class. It showed a woman in an apron standing in front of a flower shop, but with angel wings drawn in careful crayon strokes. "Mrs. Reynolds," Emma said shyly, "I drew this for you. Daddy says you're our guardian angel, but I think guardian angels should still be able to have flower shops if they want to." Cass knelt down to Emma's level, accepting the drawing with the solemnity it deserved. "Thank you, Emma. This is beautiful. And you're right, guardian angels should definitely be allowed to have flower shops." As the sun set over Millhaven that evening, Cass stood in her cottage garden, tending to the roses she had planted when she first arrived in town. They had grown stronger and more beautiful each year, their roots deepening in soil that had given them everything they needed to flourish. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, from the mountains of Afghanistan to the quiet streets of a small Oregon town, from Lieutenant Commander Reynolds to Cassidy the florist, and back to someone who was finally authentically both. The community that had offered her shelter had also given her something she hadn't expected to find, the understanding that strength and gentleness weren't opposites, but partners in the work of protecting what mattered most. In her pocket, She carried two items that represented the fullness of who she had become. The tactical knife that connected her to her past and the sense of duty that had shaped her. And Emma's drawing that represented her present and the community that had embraced all of who she was. Lieutenant Commander Cassidy Reynolds had found her peace in Millhaven. Not by abandoning who she had been, but by discovering that the warrior and the gardener could coexist in the same person, each making the other stronger. And in a town that had learned to look beyond appearances and assumptions, she had finally found a place where both sides of her identity could flourish like the flowers she tended with such careful, loving precision. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.